Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Carlo Piana. I am the chair of the board of the Open Source Initiative, and I'm here to present the open source AI definition, finally. So we announced that the open source AI definition version 1.0 has been published. It's already there, so it's an achievement. It's been a result of a very long, demanding, exhausting, and broad, multidisciplinary, multi-stakeholder, global conversation. Many people ask us, what's in your mind? Why have you endeavored in this exercise? Well, you know that open source initiative, and shockingly, this morning, I was at the booth of OSI, and many people don't know what open source initiative is about or have a very vague understanding. So maybe we fill in some details. We are the maintainer of the open source definition, the definition of open source software, and what defines open source. And we have been serving the community for 26 years now. And the importance of the ecosystem cannot be overstated. Thanks to the efforts of hundreds of thousands of people, many in this building, many out there, many of them we will never know about, open source has grown in these 26 years from nowhere, honestly, to be the fundamental brick of an entire chain of technology. There is no area of technology without open source inside, and sometimes open source is the technology. And open source definition is what tells apart open source and non-open source. And we were very fine, going very smoothly for 26 years, maintaining a definition, approving licenses, educating people, starting doing some bit of policy work, but that was fine. But the paradigm shifted again, and AI became popularized. Devices, services using AI started coming to the hands and usable for millions of people. And people started to use it, and people started to use the term open source AI without any kind of definition. They self-appointed themselves as open source AI, and also legislators and regulators started noticing and thinking of exempting, for instance, open source AI from AI regulations. That happens with the AI Act. And we actually hinted to the regulator to do that. But we don't have a definition. And if not us, who are the custodian of the term of trade, open source, in software, who else would have done it? Somebody else? Or nobody? Or everybody with their own version of open source? And this is confusion we could not accept. So we were pressed and convinced to undertake this. But of course, we have the open source software definition, but it's no way viable to govern something which is radically different technically. So if you use that, you go nowhere. So we had to abstract a little bit, to go more general, to go back to the root of what open source at its foundation really is. And we have to rethink it. So what we aim for is to giving everybody using, receiving open source AI the same level, not the same rule, but the same level of freedoms, the same level of permission, the same level of possibility that maps to what is possible with open source software. And when I say this freedom, there are two ways They go together. One thing that you need is the permission, so the legal part, but the legal part is relatively easy. I'm a lawyer, so I tend to see it as an easy thing. The difficult part is the technical part. So how can you give permissionless, how will you enable permissionless, frictionless innovation? How can you create a true level play field? So to allow competition, so to allow people to take the existing and bring it to something else, something more. Being able to innovate not just on the top of it, because that's not open source. Open source is innovating on the top of it, innovating aside of it, and taking things from scratch, and redoing the entire exercise, and be able to redo and repurpose. That's building on the shoulders of giants. And this is what open source is all about. So if you think in these terms, you see that what we have done is really, I would say, clever. So this is the kind of innovation we want to achieve. So we entered a very demanding effort. And the part of the effort was to listen to the people who don't speak up, to the people who don't speak with us. It was an outreaching activity we endeavored to. And everything in the utmost openness, as open as possible. We have received complaints that we have been too open, actually. And we get in people from different areas, not just States and Europe, Africa, Asia, not just from the industry, not just from the activists, our grassroots people, but also from academia, from government, from other areas of expertise besides law and technology, philosophy also. So we have produced a definition which had to draw a line somewhere. We could draw a line to one extreme, we could draw a line on the other extreme, risking to have a non-meaningful definition or something which is non-meaningful on the other side. So everything in the kitchen sink could be open source. So we have collaborated with with the people who are now doing collaborative AI development. So we are very proud and very happy that projects like Elutor AI and LLM 360 are okay with our line. So this has been a long exercise, much awaited, but we have to rush through because it was already late. So the people are they're already open source projects or soi-disant open source projects out there. Many don't smell like open source. It's made like closed source or something. But of course we are trying to something which is new. This is why this is called version 1.0. Because this is but the initial step. We have already, we're forming an open source AI committee to advise the board, to advise the open source initiative, and to gather more voices and to advise on the implementation and advise on possible changes. We are not excluding changes. We're not seeking because we think we have done a good job, but nothing is written in stone. And we don't have the truth in our pockets. We listen to people. We went to the right people, we think. And, you know. So, final remark before I hand over to my colleagues. I am today stepping down from the chair of the Board of Open Source Initiative. I try as much as possible to survive until today, but it was exhausting, and I'm leaving the board in the capable hand of the upcoming chair, Tracy Hines, but I will remain in the board, and I will serve in the Open Source AI Committee. So thank you very much for your attention, and more to it from Mer and Nick. Thank you.
Hello. Hello. It's great to see all of you here. I've got a little cold, as you'll hear, so I'll just do my best. And there's Nick. Okay. So, who is standing in front of you today? My name is Mer. My pronouns are she and her, and I was the co-design facilitator for the open source AI definition. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the co-design process, but if you want to hear more about that, we have an entire session tomorrow about co-designing the OSAID. And I'm also the founder of a co-design firm called Do Big Good, which is based in Seattle. So OSI is my client and partner. And I'm going to be co-presenting today with Nick Vidal, who I think most of you know, who is the community manager at the Open Source Initiative, and of course was a critical partner and collaborator in this process. So we're going to go back and forth a bit today. So Carlo did a great job of saying what the OSI is, maintains the open source definition, and is the creator and convener of this open source AI definition. Benefits of OSAI, why we think it's a good thing and important to make it work. And these are notes from Leah Gimple at the Digital Public Goods Alliance, and you'll see throughout this presentation how we're referencing and relying on the good work of many other excellent organizations working in OSAI. So the first, transparency and safety. OSAI provides essential auditing systems to mitigate bias and ensure accountability and transparency, accelerating also AI safety research. The second, and Leah is much more of an intellectual than I am, so this is Leah's language, market deconcentration and AI polyculture, which is just rolls off the tongue, it's delicious. But it means making more models available, spurring innovation, and quality due to increased competition, attacking AI monoculture, providing more stakeholders access to foundational technology, and also diverse applications. So giving developers access to resources to develop context-specific, localized application that's representative of cultural and linguistic diversity and allow for model aligned with different value systems. Also, as Carlo mentioned, why define open source AI now? And he basically mentioned all of these, but now for those who are more visually oriented, now you can see them in text. So, frontier of open source, defining OSAI is the most significant challenge facing the open source movement, or one of the most significant challenges. We have the opportunity to shape regulation in the EU and US in terms of what open source AI will mean. And then finally, as we mentioned, to combat open washing, right? That there are actors who are stretching the term open source to fit non-open systems because it still has a tremendous amount of social capital. So we want to make sure that the principles and freedoms of open source are maintained in artificial intelligence. So now, how do we create this definition? Briefly. First of all, co-design means designing with others. This is actually a definition from a co-design participant named Maria Cruz, who some of you may know. She works at Google, and the open source strategist. This is a more academic definition. It's a set of creative methods for making collective decisions by sharing knowledge and power. And here's a picture. Here's a picture. What does co-design look like? So this is a photograph from our Data and AI workshop that happened earlier this month in Paris. It's been quite a whirlwind month. And we have people from around the world that are coming from different backgrounds. We have someone Tom Vaughn, who actually runs the code for the Common Crawl. He creates that data set. We have Ricardo Miron from Digital Public Goods Alliance, also someone based in Latin America. We have Joanna Veron from Coding Rights, an activist who is specifically interested in defending the rights of humans on the internet. And then we have an academic, Dr. Ignatius Azani, who is also has a dual appointment in both the UK and in Nigeria, and is also working on natural language processing model about underrepresented African languages. And we have everyone sitting around a table, everyone sitting around a whiteboard, and the top of it says, you can kind of see it, it says data set design and governance. And we have lots of Post-its, lots of dots. So if you want to have a visual of like what did this co-design process look like when it was offline, this is an example for you. So, although I joined this project actually kind of at All Things Open last year, it did exist before then. So Nick, do you want to talk about consultation before 2024?
Yeah, so what's interesting is that the OSI has been working on this topic of open source and AI for quite a few years now, since 2022. And we started with some research and analysis of that. And at the time, this was called Deep Dive, this project. And we talked with several experts from all different domains. And as part of this deep dive, we have podcasts, we have panels. This is all available on our website, opensource.org/AI. And this has really shaped our understanding of the challenges, right? So at that time, we already saw that data was something that was going to be challenging. The requirement of data sets to be part of the open source AI definition. We also had some webinars. As when Mer joined, we organized several webinar series. We have about 18 webinars there, which is all available as well.
Thank you, Nick. So when I came on to do this formal co-design process for the definition, one of the first questions we asked is, who are the stakeholders in open source AI? And in collaboration with the OSI board, we came up with 4 critical stakeholder groups. The first being developers who are creating OSAI systems and/or components. So, for example, a machine learning researcher or someone like Tom Vaughan, who is actually running the crawl of Common Crawl to create that data set. Then we have deployers, so people who are seeking to study, use, modify, or share an OSAI system or component. So that would be an AI researcher, a health researcher, someone who is, has high levels of technical skill, though. They're actually able to and desiring to manipulate, that's not a good word, use, modify, share the system. Then we have an end user. So this is someone who consumes an OSAI output, but does not seek to study, use, modify, or share the system, right? So prime example of this is a casual chatbot user, right? They're not seeking the code, they're not seeking the data, they just want to use the output and interact with the system. And then finally, we had a subject. So this is someone who is unintentionally affected upstream or downstream by an OSAI, right? So unlike the end user who's saying, oh, great, an AI, an OSAI, they have some kind of sense that they're choosing to interact with it, there are many people who are affected without knowing it and without choosing to be. So the example of an upstream subject would be someone like a photographer who finds her image in an open source data set. And an example of a downstream subject would be a customer whose loan application is reviewed by an OSAI. So they want a loan from a bank, but they didn't say, oh yes, please let an AI review my bank loan, right? So we said these are really key groups to make sure that we're talking to. And then these are our estimates based on publicly available information from our most active and publicly self-identified co-designers, how this shakes out. Obviously, these are also intersectional identities, right? So someone could be a developer and a deployer, which is probably not that uncommon, right? So about 30% of the people who are most active co-designers are developers of OSAI components and systems. Almost half were actually deployers, so people who do seek to study, use, modify, and share the system. About 90% had interacted with OSAI in some way, which has caused them to be interested in being participants in our process. And then I had made estimates of how many were subjects, but since the entire idea of subject is that you are unknowingly and unintentionally participating, I said, I am actually not going to estimate that, but it is an important group that we felt we want to make sure that we are bearing that in mind as we're going through this process. And not only were we thinking of roles and relationships to OSAI, but we're also thinking about global diversity, which has to do with gender. So including women in the process, trans folks in the process, non-binary folks in the process, folks of color in the process, including folks that are Black, folks that are indigenous, the global South, people from the global South in the process. So this is just one snapshot of, in all many different countries and regions around the world. We gave workshops in 5 continents, South America, North America, Africa, Europe, and Asia, and had virtual participants and in-person participants from more than 35 countries that we are aware of. We did not always ask folks for their location. So moving on from the stakeholders to what we did with them. So our first co-design question was, study, use, modify, share. What should these open source principles mean for artificial intelligence? And as you can see, this is building off the previous work of the Free Software Foundation, which has done a beautiful job in defining these principles for open source. And this is how, through those, you can see, and again, come tomorrow if you want to hear more about the co-design process. But you had people in real life, in workshops, writing out how they thought these terms should be defined for OSAI. So we have used the system for any purpose and without having to ask permission, study how the system works and inspect its components, modify the system for any purpose, including to change its output, share the system for others to use with or without modification for any purpose. And so this is the principles of open source AI written by co-designers in our definition. Second, there's multiple parts of the co-design process. You're going to get to today. Come tomorrow to hear for more. But the second question we ask is which components must be open in order for an AI system to be used, studied, modified, and shared. And this was the most contentious question, right? Because there are such a range of opinions, and people feel very strongly about whatever their position might be, right? So we looked at systems. Remember, we're working without an open source AI definition into an open source AI definition. So we focused on 4 systems self-described as open, right? When you're going from no definition into definition, you're going from I am open source, and then we say, okay, let's dig into that. So we had a group focused on Llama 2, a group focused on Bloom, a group focused on Pythia, and a group focused on OpenCV. And you can see in each group, these folks said, yes, you may share my name, you may share my affiliation. I understand it's important for the transparency of the process. And one thing we were very proud of in this was that over 50% of participants in these work groups are people of color, 30% are Black, 25% are women, trans, and non-binary. And we also had, I think 20 to 30% are from sub-Saharan Africa. So that is who is making this the second set of decisions after the principles. And we went through this process of voting in work groups based on the Linux Foundation's Model Openness Framework, which has an excellent list of open source AI components that we used for our voting, and asked, is this component, and you can see that on the far left, is this component necessary to study, to use, to modify, to share the system, right? And you have people voting with their initials because the voting was public and transparent. It's actually still public online if you want to look at it, and many folks have. So then there was a vote compilation, which is, again, still online. You may audit it. And public results were published in a forum of like, hey, this is what it looks like the results of the tabulation were. How does that look? You can see certain were ranked really, really high. Like you can see those green items, training, validation, and testing code ranked with a really high number of votes, as did inference code. Certain other components ranked much lower in terms of folks voting for their requirement. And then we had comments on that. Then we rolled that into version 0.0.6 in March. And from there, I'm going to pass it on to Nick to talk about additional requirements and version 1.0.
So we received some guidance from the board, from the OSI board, of reaching the open source CI definition, right, we have basically 3 requirements from the board. And those requirements are, it must be supported by a diverse group of stakeholders. As you can see, Mer has done an excellent job around that. It also must provide real-life examples. So if we were to have a definition that no AI system actually can match that, that will not be useful. And we have groups like the Digital Public Goods Alliance, which are relying on an open source CI definition that can actually be used and be useful to promote their plans, right? And we set a deadline for all things open because the AI Act in Europe is already going into effect very soon, and this indecision, right, around what's actually open source CI is really bad. We have to have a clear definition. So basically, this is the open source CI definition and all the sections available. So the first part is just some basic concepts, a preamble, why we need an open source CI definition, right? The second part is actually what's open source CI. We have a definition of we rely on the 4 freedoms, rights, related to software but applied for AI. Finally, we have a definition of the preferred form to make modifications to machine learning specifically, and some clarifications. So this is just version 1.0. The first 2 parts, they are mostly very stable. We don't anticipate many changes to that. And the other parts, of course, we're very much open to feedback, right? So what's the core of the open source AI definition? So the core are the 4 freedoms: the freedom to use, to study, to modify, and to share the AI system. A definition of open weights, which are the model weights and parameters. The code, which must be open. All the code must be open, especially the one to train the system and to run the system, right? And finally, perhaps one of the most controversial parts is the data information, right? Either the data sets in full or enough information about what was the data set that was used for that AI system. And this is something I want to dive deep into with regards to data information. So at one end, we had a group of people who believe that the definition the current definition is too open, right? Especially because we require data information. And other folks believe that it's too close. You should make the whole data set available. And we wanted to clarify why that was important. So I want to show that, in fact, the open source CI definition is pretty strict. And let me just read here. We require a listing of all public available training data so that you can check for biases and you can actually check and see how that was developed, right? A listing of all training data obtainable from third parties and where to obtain that, even including for a fee. So for example, if some AI system, they use Reddit as a data set, they could say that we use Reddit. Even though you have to pay a fee for that, to acquire that data, at least you know that that was something that was used as a data set, right? And finally, a detailed description of all data, including unshareable data, data that provides information about the provenance of the data, its scope and characteristics, how the data was obtained and selected, and the labeling procedures and data cleaning methodologies. So it's something very precise, something that we believe it strikes a balance, right, between trying to provide as much information as possible about the data sets. It's interesting because as we explore this during the open source AI definition, a lot of folks believe that the data sets, they treat the same way, all the data sets. But we actually discovered that there are 4 types of classes. We were able to classify this into 4 types of classes of data, right? So an open training data, a public training data, obtainable training data, and unshareable non-public training data. For each one of those classes, we have different requirements of what's made available or not, right? So for example, we have a technique called federated learning, where you actually train the model without sharing information, without sharing the data. So, and a lot of those AI systems on federated learning, they are open source, right? But they don't actually have the data sets because they really care about privacy, right? And so having those categories, those data classes, we were able to also classify that as an open source AI, those federated learning AI systems.
Yep. And in addition, we realized we cannot address all the concerns and nuances and complexities about training data in the definition alone. So earlier this month, with the support of the Sloan Foundation, we had an in-person workshop specifically around how can we make training data in open source AI work as well as possible, given the desires for openness and the desires for privacy and consent. And we had in this group, well, you have photos of them. We had folks from 18 folks from 15 countries. I would say, yeah, largely representing civil society and academia, with a specific focus on, openness, rights, principles, maintaining principles of open source, right? You have folks from Creative Commons, GovLab, Open Future, Open Knowledge Foundation, Coding Rights, Digital Public Goods Alliance, a couple of 3 universities actually. So we said, let's build and give more on this important issue. And you can't really see it, but the process was that we had this lovely man, Alec Tarkowski, who works at Open Future, create a draft of this document, Data Governance Open Source. Then we had all these folks comment on the document. They came into this workshop in person. They gave more information about what they want to be in the white paper, and then it's actually going to be shared back with that group this Friday, and then will come out in December. So also that white paper is part of a very explicit international, transparent co-design process to say, okay, let's really focus in on training data, let's get it right, let's give it the attention that it deserves.
Mm-hmm. And this was just one of the events that we organized and we participated in. Just this year, you can see here more or less what was our timeline of the events where we participated and the drafts that we were creating. We not only had in-person events, but also online town halls to make it as accessible as possible. And here are just the events in 2024. So we were in Europe, we were in North America, Latin America, Asia, and Africa as well. So we try to englobe as many different stakeholders from all over the world. Also, we wanted to highlight the voices of the people who were volunteers, who were part of those working groups organized by Mer, And it was not just, the co-design process was not just a voting exercise. It was much more, it was much deeper than that. It was around creating discussions about exploring challenges and opportunities for open source AI. So we wanted to highlight those stories, those individual stories from volunteers who participated in the co-design process. And for that, we created a series called Voices of the Open Source AI Definition. And so we have Mer who led this, and 10 voices that we were able to gather. And they shared their whole experience of how was this co-design process. I highly recommend you to access opensource.org/blog and reading those stories and trying to understand how they came to the co-design process, what they learned from the co-design process, and what are their ideas about the future of open source AI. We have folks from all over the world. We have folks who have come from Africa, from India. We have experts like Felix Reda, who is a former member of the European Parliament. We have experts in AI like Ezekiel from Intel, and so many others, right? So I highly recommend reading that series. Also, this work developed by Open Source AI and its partners was mentioned on the press. We were mentioned on New York Times and so many other articles. And this is really important. It's an important topic. We really need a clear definition, and there's a demand for that. And so we try as much as possible to answer some common questions and misconceptions about open source AI. As I mentioned, our work was on the New York Times, The Economist, Bloomberg, and so many others. Now, how can you support the open source AI definition? Right now, you can endorse the open source AI definition. You can go to our website, opensource.org/AI, and look at the definition, try to understand. It's version 1.0. We need your feedback, but this is the first step, right? And we want to hear from you. So come and join our website. Here are some institutions who have already endorsed the open source AI definition. So Mozilla, the Mozilla Foundation has been a great endorser. They have helped us to promote this with their partners as well. We have Eleufer AI, who are building open source AI, and they're true experts as well, and so many others. As well, both from academia as well, and also from the markets, right? And I wanted to highlight a few endorsers, some individuals as well, who share some quotes. So I'll work together with Mer with
Yeah,
that.
we're going to collaborate on this.
Yeah, so I'm going to be announcing the endorsers. And can you read the quotes, please?
Oh, is that how you want to do it?
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
All right. So we have an expert here, Percy Liang, who's director of Center for Research on Foundational Models from Stanford University.
Thanks. Coming up with the proper open source definition is challenging, given restrictions on data. But I'm glad to see that the OSI version 1.0 definition requires at least that the complete code for data processing, the primary driver of model quality, be open source. The devil is in the details, so I'm sure we'll have more to say once we have concrete examples of people trying to apply this definition to their models.
We also have Liv Martz Christensen Nordholm, CEO of the Digital Public Goods Alliance.
We welcome OSI's stewardship of the complex process of defining open source AI. The Digital Public Goods Alliance Secretariat will build on this foundational work as we update the DPG standard and as we relate AI to the category of digital public goods.
Also, we would like to highlight Avia. I believe she is here. She's head of policy and ethics at Eleufer AI.
Transparency is at the core of Luther AI's nonprofit mission. The open source AI definition is a necessary step towards promoting the benefits of open source principles in the field of AI. We believe that this definition supports the needs of independent machine learning researchers and promotes greater transparency among the largest AI developers.
We also have Tom Falcon, who's the principal technologist from the Common Crawl Foundation.
And we know that we're at time, so if you do have to get to your next session, we grant you leave. The Common Crawl Foundation fully supports the open source AI definition as a crucial step in setting clear standards for open and transparent AI development. This definition will help ensure AI develops responsibly, staying open and accessible to everyone.
And this is the last quote that we have. I would like to highlight this person because Suji Sadhu, he has been very much involved in the forums that we have online for discussions, answering all the questions. He's the chairman of the Open Source Group Japan.
Yeah. Open Source Group Japan commends OSI for its leadership in navigating the complex process of defining open source AI. And we fully support the open source AI definition, OSAID, as a key standard for open and transparent AI systems. The field of AI is rapidly evolving, and the need for a clear and consistent definition of open source AI has never been more critical. Oh, that sounds fun. OSAI's OSAID marks a crucial milestone toward a future where collaboration and openness are the norms in AI development. We anticipate that this will drive innovation, transparency, and the ethical development of AI systems.
So you have the opportunity to be part of this by endorsing the open source AI definition. And you can access opensource.org/AI. You can be part of the discussions as well. Thank you to our co-designers. And with that, we would like to thank you for being part of that.
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks.